But I think it would be great as well. Like, so, you know, give us a bit of background on, obviously a lot of people are joining now because they want to ask you both pretty much anything that there is to know about Envoy. So can you give us like a quick overview of the project's history, of, you know, how we've got to where we are today with Envoy?
Sure. Do you want me to take that, or do you want to take it, Lizan?
Matt, go ahead.
Okay. Let's see. Brief project history. So, I started Envoy at Lyft in 2015. It's loosely based on some software that I wrote back at Twitter. At least some of the ideas and experiences are from that time. And yeah, so we started Envoy at Lyft, and originally the intention was as an edge proxy and an API gateway. We rolled it out at Lyft with great success. And then very quickly, we started using it in what is now known as the quote service mesh role. And by, I'd say, the beginning or mid 2016, Lyft was 100% Envoy. So it was Envoy at the edge, and Envoy was being used for all service communication. We open sourced Envoy at the fall of 2016, and much to my personal amazement, you know, the project blew up very fast. My dream upon open sourcing was to get it used by maybe one other company, you know, like some peer company of Lyft, maybe like a Stripe or a, you know, Slack or a Square or something like that. And you know what has happened since then has been really amazing. You know, just from the other open source, you know, products that have taken it up, like Istio, to all of the companies that are using it, to all of the cloud providers. It's been a really incredible ride. We joined the CNCF in 2017. We became a CNCF graduated project in 2018. And you know, since then the growth has just continued to increase. Just the community has gotten larger, the number of contributors, the number of maintainers. It's been really amazing ride. So that's a very brief history.
And then we get to do things like this as well, where we put you as the creator and Lizan as our incredible security expert and contributor and maintainer, you know, in front of people to be able to talk about it, and, you know, to really understand what the use cases are, where people are, you know, trying to implement it and what they're doing with it. So thank you both very much for joining, and everybody who has joined us so far. We've got 35 people in this call already, which is incredibly impressive. So for those of you who have joined us, welcome. Thank you very much. And we really look forward to being able to, I say the royal we, because I'm not going to be answering any questions. Let's be honest about that. So for Matt and Lizan to answer your questions, we've got the Q&A feature there for you to use. So start the questions rolling in. You know, we'll get around to as many as we can, and we'll do our best to go through as many within the next hour as possible. So before we get going, Lizan, Matt, could you give us a little bit of an introduction about yourselves as well? Obviously, we've had a fantastic overview about the project, but Lizan, could you introduce yourself?
Okay. Hi, I'm Lizan. I'm one of the Envoy maintainer. Primarily working on build stuff, security stuff, and stuff related to Istio. I started working on Envoy just right at the moment. It's open sourced, and works on Istio half and half as well.
Hey, I'm Matt. I'm a software engineer at Lyft currently, where I spend about half of my time doing this type of stuff, so open source and industry outreach. I spend the other 50% or so of my time tech leading our production infrastructure team. So that owns things like our compute platform and networking and deploys and resilience and all of that type of stuff. Previous to Lyft, I worked at Twitter. Before that, I worked in AWS. So I've spent about the last 10 plus years working in cloud stuff, and then 10 years previous just working in operating systems and networking and virtualization and those types of things.
Amazing. Well, thank you. While we're waiting for the audience questions to start rolling in, there was a couple of questions that were submitted when people registered, and also we've got the hashtag #TetraAMA as well, which you can use on Twitter and LinkedIn to submit questions as well. And we'll, have a bit of social media going on in the background. So while people are getting warmed up, we'll jump on in with a question that came in over email, which is, I want to develop a controller for Envoy, specifically LDS and RDS services. I've read some blog posts and I'm going to be using Go control plane package, but the development path is not clear for me. I don't know where I should start or how I should progress. I'm hoping you can help me to clear the development path.
Matt, I think you have more experience than me on this one. I mean,
okay. Sure.
Yeah.
So I will start by saying that for better or worse, developing an Envoy management server is not so easy. I think there are things that we could do to make it easier, and there's some things that we're proposing in terms of pushing more functionality into Go control plane, and there's a project that we started called XDS Relay, which will hopefully also make management server development simpler. But the best that I can offer right now is if the docs that we have are not sufficient, and if you're not getting the answers that you would like, either through the Envoy Slack or through the email lists, I think looking at some of the other projects that are open source that implement control planes is probably going to be the best way to learn. So, you could look at Istio. Istio, though, is a fairly complicated system, so that might not be the best one to start with. You might want to look at a project called Kuma, which is an Envoy-based service mesh. You might want to look at Ambassador, which is an Envoy-based edge proxy, or Contour, which is an Envoy-based edge proxy. But I think by starting and looking at some of the existing control planes, that many of those use Go control plane, that's probably the best way to learn.
All right, thank you. And we've got more questions. So next one, I want to contribute to the Envoy project, but I'm lost on where to start. What are some of the core concepts I have to know before I can start contributing to the project?
You want to start first, Lizan?
Yeah, sure. So I think depends on which of the area that you want to contribute it to. I would recommend to look at we recently bring up a doc called Life of a Request, which gives you pretty detail of how the request and packet processing through Envoy and the concept that you have to understand. I think that's a very good place to start with.
The other thing that I would say is I would say a couple of things. One is that we have some beginner issues tagged in the repo. So there's a label called beginner. I would search through those. The other main thing that I would say is that I think there's a misconception that in order to contribute to the project, you have to be like a C++ networking expert. We actually, frankly, have plenty of people that can program C++ and understand networking. Where we need the most contribution, to be honest, is we have lots of tooling that's written in Python that works on our, some of our APIs, our documentation. We always need docs help. We need help with examples. So I'd really encourage people who want to get involved to not worry as much about the C++ or the low-level networking. And I think helping with some of the tooling and some of the documentation stuff is a really fantastic way of learning about the project and also helping out a lot.
Yeah.
Great, thank you. And we've got a hand raised in the attendees. So I'm going to go ahead and unmute Zhou, and you can go ahead and ask your question.
Oh, my questions, I'm not quite sure if you already asked regarding for the upstream connection port. If you already asked, just let me know. Can we actually make the upstream connection port independent, or like there's option, like say, like, because currently upstream connection port is actually tied to the client, the downstream connection, right? And this, if you have many upstream clients, the connection port will be pretty efficient because you create each connection port per per downstream connections. Is there any possible like HA proxy or something is like the connection port, the connection inside the upstream connection port be shared among the connection as an option, something like that?
Are you asking if it can be shared across worker threads? Because
shared work thread or shared between like the upstream connection, you know, the the downstream connection. Basically, yeah.
Yeah, I think we already do that today. It's pretty much up to your configuration based, like how you configure your cluster. But today I do think we reuse the like upstream connection as much as possible.
Yeah, all of the connections are reused today. We do not reuse connections across worker threads currently. There's an issue open on that. One other PR that's in flight right now is Alyssa has a PR open now, which will make the upstream connection pool implementations pluggable. And I'm hoping that this change will allow us to more easily iterate on different types of connection pooling implementations, whether those be ones that are, you know, possibly shared across worker threads, or you know, handling, for example, like HTTP 1 to 2 upgrades, or, you know, there's all types of different things that we might want to do there.
I don't want to bother people. Like, do we have more any document talking about the worker thread against together with downstream connections, the client side connections?
Yeah, the downstream connection, like if you have like many downstream connections and one like upstream, it will be like tied together to one upstream connection, unless you have different or specific settings for your cluster.
Yeah, there's pretty detailed architecture documents around the threading model. I've given some talks on the threading model. So I think that should hopefully answer your questions.
My question is the dot between the downstream client HTTP connection versus worker, I mean, the threading things, like that's a different level things. You know, so you think like regarding to downstream connection, downstream basically client connections, it's unrelated, and the connection port is mainly at a work thread level. It's unrelated to like HTTP. I'm talking about HTTP 1.1. There is a notion of like a client connection, and which basically,
Yes, we reuse the connection as much as possible, unless your upstream server is telling Envoy to close the connection, or like in HTTP go away, or like something like that. Otherwise, Envoy will reuse the connection as much as possible.
When we say reuse, are we reusing that per HTTP 1.1 client side connection?
No, no, it's all the connection, all the downstream connection will be reusing same upstream connection as much as possible.
Regardless in HTTP context. So it's actually fully controlled by worker thread in some sense, like because
in same thread, yes.
In same thread. Okay, yes. I will take a look at the thread. Thank you very much for clarifying these things.
All right, thank you very much. And we've got so many questions coming in through the Q&A, so we'll go to another one of those. Aminesh has asked, we have been using Istio/Envoy as a front proxy, as an API gateway, and as a service proxy within the service mesh. The clients are authenticated via MTLS at the Istio ingress. This works fine for any HTTP/gRPC upstream services with a HTTP upstream service. The client certificate is available as X forwarded client cert, mouthful. Now we have a new use case to support TCP service in the service mesh. The TCP client certificate carries some information that the upstream TCP service needs. Is there some way to pass the certificate presented by the client at ELB to the upstream server?
In short term, there's no straightforward way to do this because the TCP, unless Envoy or the other like proxy in the middle understand the protocol on top of the TCP. TCP doesn't have a way to carry arbitrary metadata such like the X forwards, XFCC like stuff. I do think the H2 tunneling can support this XFCC to the sidecar, but from the sidecar to your upstream like TCP application, it really needs to understand what the protocol on top of that.
Yep.
It has to issue the metadata understandable by the TCP service.
All right, excellent. And next question is, how is the integration of TLS 1.3 on Envoy going? Who's going to be the best one to take that? Lizan?
I think it's already there.
Yeah, it's been implemented for quite some time. I think I think the one gotcha is that the upstream, I believe, does not default to negotiating 1.3. And that is something that is configurable. So I think if you want upstream TLS 1.3, you have to explicitly configure it. I think just because we assume that some upstream servers might not support it. But it's been supported for quite some time.
Yeah, and the other one is probably the 0 RTT on TLS 1.3 is not implemented either.
All right, let's keep the questions rolling in as well. These are really great. Let's go for a shorter one as well. Is there an Envoy Proxy up and running book coming?
If someone out there wants to write it, it will be coming. Not that I know of. There's been some books that have been proposed, but no one has followed through on writing it. Writing a book is an incredible amount of work. So I think it would take some real commitment for someone to do that.
So a great call to action to anyone on this conference call or any members of the community that want to go ahead and start that off.
If you would like the glory of writing a book, we can help make that happen.
I think there would be a great audience for it as well, by the sounds of things as well. So definitely. So next question that we've got come in is, what is the status on UDP support?
We just upgraded that to non-alpha. So I mean there are people that are using it in production, at least for the UDP proxy side of things. I think there's a DNS filter in progress. There's some more changes that we would like to make eventually to the UDP proxy support to support generic protocol hashing, so that you could use it for consistent hashing for like quick or for different types of UDP protocols. That does not exist yet. But in terms of the core proxying support, it should be production ready.
Great, thank you. Amanesh came back with another question based on his earlier ask with regards to the TCP service support. So, and the HTTP, yes. So could you go into like more detail on tunneling HTTP option as a follow-on to TCP support?
So I think the H2 tunnel thing that I talked before is basically having your the TCP inside of then HTTP that just like WebSocket, but like it's on H2 on connect layer. Then it can carry arbitrary metadata like any like HTTP headers. So that can bring that metadata into your server-side sidecar that's living aside your TCP service. But the last hop, you still need some way to propagate that. Yeah, feel free to ping me on Envoy Slack for more details if you want to follow up.
Thank you, Lizan. And we've got, please do keep these questions rolling in. The Q&A is looking a little bit thin right now. But has there been any significant interest in proxying traffic using the SIP or RTP protocols?
Yeah, this is what I was talking about before. I think there is interest. There's people that would like to use different UDP protocols. The issue is whether we need consistent hashing. And right now, like I was saying, we don't have generic consistent hashing support for UDP protocols. That's something that I think that we can add actually relatively easily. It just hasn't been done yet.
All right. And is there a high-level way to capture the request path and the response path in a request without writing a custom filter for Envoy?
We've got the tap filter
today,
which does that. So I would definitely look into that. Again, that's something that I think that we can invest in more, but would definitely love some feedback there in terms of how that's working. I would also just mention that we have Lua support, so Lua support will allow you to script whatever you want. And I'm surprised that no one has asked about WebAssembly yet, but WebAssembly should be hopefully upstream, in the next month or two. And then that would also allow, I won't call it scripting because people will be offended, but it will allow more easily writing custom filters.
And what's the easiest way for them to get that feedback to the community?
From my perspective, always GitHub. I think GitHub is the most guaranteed way of getting support typically.
Yeah.
But we have a very active Slack community, so always happy to chat with people there as well.
Brilliant. And wow, we really are getting the questions coming in now. Can we integrate third-party APIs without knowing the, I don't know if that's extract or exact port, and can we expose any API with a specific port that we defined? Do we need more information to answer that question?
Maybe I think this person is asking for dynamic forward proxy, and assuming that the dynamic forward proxy support works, I think that's what this person is asking for, but I'm not completely sure.
Yeah, I'm not completely sure either. Or like this one is asking about the port discovery. I don't know.
Right, but I mean, dynamic forward proxy should pass through the port if it's set. So I think it should work, but I'm not completely sure.
Yeah. Dynamic forward proxy does that.
If you are the person that asked that question, you want to follow up and provide any more context, just let us know and we can circle back to that as well. Because I think someone has commented in the side chat, as far as I know at present, WASM filters need to be written in C++/Rust. What is the plan? Oh, it's another question, apologies. What is the plan for adding on Go support for WASM filters?
I think there's someone that's working on a TinyGo SDK currently. I'm not sure what the status of that is. Lizan might know, and I know that someone's working on TypeScript also. So I would expect before long we would have Rust, C++, TinyGo, and TypeScript. Do you happen to know the current status, Lizan?
Yeah, so I know that there's like TinyGo SDK, which is in, I think it's in like experimental status. There's some basic, some difficulties like bring Go into WebAssembly at this moment with the like garbage collector and other stuff. So I think at the end it will work, but the WebAssembly ecosystem are also young and premature in some area. So it does take more time than C++ and Rust.
Yeah, and you know, the one thing that I would say about WebAssembly is that, like we just said, it's really, really early days. Like I'm very optimistic about WebAssembly as the future of, you know, the way that we'll extend Envoy and the way that, you know, the people will write plugins. But realistically, it's going to take multiple years, you know, to reach maturity in the SDKs, in the runtimes, in the overall ecosystem. So, you know, if you need to get running fast, I think C++ extensions are still the way to go. Tons of people use the Luajit extensions. So that might be a way of getting going quickly if you need to.
We've had some amazing questions coming in, and they still are. So we'll, you know, we're getting through these pretty quickly. So thank you both for being so on the ball as well. So next question is, when is Envoy adding OCSP support? I see there has been interest and someone posted design doc on envoy-dev.
I think Stefan at Slack is going to implement this. I'm not sure when, but you could ping the issue and ask or talk to him in Slack.
Great, and it's worth knowing as well that you are a very open community, aren't you? And you're very responsive and lovely people to get in touch with. So, you know, questions like this or anything that's ongoing in dev docs or any questions that they've got, they are able to contact you as a community on Slack and post them in the relevant channels as well. So, you know, it's not limited to AMAs that they can get in touch and check in with stuff. So next question, what is the current roadmap for Envoy Mobile? Will there be significant features built for mobile traffic?
Yeah, so brief update there. We're now in production at Lyft. So the production app is using Envoy Mobile on both platforms, which is a really great accomplishment. It's not yet 100% rolled out, but we're doing experiments. In terms of the major roadmap moving forward, I think there's a couple of different areas. One of them is obviously going to be quick IPv6 support, so just dealing with all of the graceful fallback and various complications there. There's a lot of things we'd like to do around observability, so better metrics compression, being able to turn metrics off and on dynamically. You know, there's lots of things in that area. Other areas are really pushing forward on our IDL support. So basically, you know, as we further integrate with protobuf, being able to annotate APIs for things like cacheability, deferred requests, offline requests, all those types of things. So I think we'll be open sourcing the Envoy mobile code generators and hoping to work on all of that kind of stuff. So the answer is yes. I think there's a pretty significant roadmap, and would certainly love. I think the project is now in a more stable state, so would certainly love to you know, talk to people that might be interested in using it.
That's really exciting. And there's another question here on timelines as well, which is there an estimate on when we can expect Windows Envoy Proxy to land?
Do you want to take this one?
It's pretty close there. We build like Windows binary on every master commit today, and we are about to turn on that for test as well. So I'd say like it should arrive. It should be available in very early alpha stage at the next release, probably end of this month or / beginning of next month. And I'd expect all tests will be running by the release after.
Yeah, the only caveat that I would say there is that once we get the alpha support landed, the performance will not be the same as Linux. There's some substantial known performance problems just with the way that Envoy does some of its I/O that isn't supported on Windows. Microsoft is very committed to fixing this, whether it's done at the Envoy layer, or what it sounds like now is they're actually going to change the kernel so that it supports ePOL and various things like that. So what the timeline is in which the Windows version has the same performance as Linux is not super clear to me, but I would hope by the end of the year.
Exciting. And is the issue with graceful termination of connections in Envoy fixed when the Envoy container receives sigterm? I believe that's the correct phraseology.
I'm not completely sure what issue we're talking about, but I'm going to take a stab here. And I think what this person is asking is, do we gracefully terminate connections when we receive sigterm? And the answer to that is no.
No.
That is still not the way that it works. We assume that there's an out of process mechanism that's doing draining. It wouldn't necessarily be difficult, you know, to do different behavior for sigterm, but to be honest, I don't know that it's super high priority, because most people that deploy Envoy, they have different needs for the way that they do draining. And in my experience, trying to be opinionated on how people do that, like with one generic sigterm implementation, doesn't go so well. So it's better for people just to use the existing admin functionality to, you know, implement whatever draining that you want.
Great. And we've got quite a long question next, so I'm gonna pace myself as I ask you this one. What are the real world use cases for A, dynamic forward proxy? How do people use this functionality? B, SNI forward proxy, how do people use that? C, UDP proxy, are people using it for NTP, DNS and other? And D, with Connect support and forward proxy, can browsers use Envoy as a generic proxy? So I'm guessing we want to break that down into several areas. So should we start with the first one about dynamic forward proxy and how people are using that?
Yeah. So dynamic forward proxy is basically we extract so it's like the pretty like the original destination cluster with the like headers, but it does the DNS resolution in addition to that. It's basically like generic forward proxy for non-encrypted traffic. Like from browsers or like other client like curls. And then the SNI forward proxy is more is for the TLS TCP based services, which Envoy doesn't terminate the connection. It does the DNS resolution and send the traffic to the to what the address is specified in the SNI header. This functionality is mostly used in the egress gateway in service mesh context. That you have the egress gateway, you don't terminate the TLS connection to whatever the external service is, and having that. Yeah, that's two use cases, and I can take the last one. With Connect support and forward proxy, can browser use this Envoy as generic proxy? I think so. That should be work once we have the Connect support.
Yeah, I think basic Connect support is actually done, so that should work today. I don't think it's in a release yet. It'll be in 1.15.
Yeah.
But if you're running a dev build, it should be there now. In terms of C UDP proxy, I actually, we don't keep track of how people are using various things, but it would certainly work for NTP or DNS or really any other protocol in which you don't necessarily need fully stateful behavior. So the way that UDP proxy works is it does do session affinity, but the session affinity is just based on 4 tuple. It's just based on port and IP address. So if there were any additional protocol specific knowledge required to do stateful hashing, that would not work currently. And that's what I was talking about before, about how we want to build in some generic stateful hashing mechanism that can look in a UDP packet and hash on specific ranges of bytes, but that's not implemented currently.
All right, sounds like there's a lot of really exciting work coming up in the next couple of releases as well. So I think there's a lot to keep an eye on in the next month or so. So the next one is, also I'm going to point something out now because the person who's asked this question has apologized. Please don't apologize when you ask a question. If there's no barrier to entry.
Yeah.
Ask away. So could you use EL, is that 1.5? EL1.5 between forward and reverse proxy, or ELI5?
What is ELI5?
Yeah, I don't know what that is either.
All right. If you did submit that question, circle back, give us a bit more information, and we can come back to it. So, wow, there's some very, very detailed ones coming up again. So using Envoy for RBAC enforcement on microservices. It works well on HTTP. Now have to extend RBAC enforcement to third-party open source apps such as Kafka, Postgres, and MongoDB. The question is how to leverage Envoy RBAC enforcement on proprietary protocols, basically almost everything that's not HTTP.
Yeah, I mean, there's no great answer here, and it's the same question that people ask when they want tracing, just because like we were talking about before, a lot of these things tend to be application specific. What I will say is that if you're able to run Envoy as a sidecar on the other service, like in front of Postgres or MySQL or those types of things, you can potentially get some benefit either through connection level RBAC or those types of things. But in terms of like, if you wanted RBAC, based on the internals of the database schema or something like that, or the Kafka, or the Kafka schema or layouts, that will require implementation in every protocol.
Yeah, that require implementation on every protocol but the RBAC have some sort of the generic way to do that is the metadata. We do have the existing MySQL and there's ongoing work for Postgres that emitting the metadata from those filters, and that filters can be taken into consideration in RBAC as well. So that's something that we do have ongoing work to make it easier, but there's no really like ultimate way to like support all of the protocol at once.
All right, so another very detailed question coming up. So this is an upstream connection pool is per downstream connection.
Hold on.
Yeah.
I think this one is from the one who jumped into the call before we answered this one.
I see. Okay.
At the beginning, the downstream connection versus upstream connection one.
All right, should we move on to the next one?
Yeah, I think we answered this in the beginning that we do reuse the connection pool as much as possible from like different downstream to upstream. So yeah, it's either up to their configuration or yeah.
All right.
So please follow up if you still have question about that.
So could you speak a little bit about the design and use cases for the XDS relay work?
Sure. At a super high level, we have an ecosystem of control planes around Envoy, and although there are some open source ones and there's some proprietary projects, the reality is there's still hundreds of organizations that are implementing their own control planes. You know, many of them in Go, on Go control plane, but there's people that have implemented them in other language as well. The idea behind XDS Relay is to try to push a bunch of functionality that people have to build if they're really going to build a reliable and resilient control plane into a middle tier. So you could think of it as like a CDN or a caching layer or a varnish-like thing, but built for XDS. So the first version that we're working on now in open source and we're about to deploy at Lyft is really just a caching tier. So the idea is that it's a lot easier to understand, you know, what the performance profile is, like how many connections it can accept, like it's easier to load test it, you know, it's easier to put all those resilience functionality like back pressure and circuit breaker and rate limiting and all of that stuff. And that should allow anyone to deploy this thing in front of their homegrown control planes and hopefully increase the resilience of their deployment. Moving forward, there's a lot of other things that we can do with XDS Relay. Like one of the things that I've been talking about is the way, you know, that you really scale out XDS is to move away from what we call state of the world updates to Delta updates. So basically incremental, you know, adds, removes, updates of individual resources. But that's very hard to implement for most control planes. So one of the things that we can do in XDS Relay is we can build in code that will convert state of the world responses into Delta responses. So this is kind of an example of where people can keep their potentially bespoke opinionated control planes for their organization, but they can deploy this piece of software in front and hopefully handle scale out.
Excellent. And we've had a response on the ELI5, and it turns out it's an acronym that I had no idea what it was. Can you explain, like I'm 5 years old, the difference between forward and reverse proxy? So ELI5 is an acronym that I will now remember. So what is the difference between forward and reverse proxy?
Sorry, what does ELI5
explain like I'm 5.
Oh. Oh, okay. That's new to me also.
Okay. That's good. I just had someone message me on the side and I can see it in the response. I was like, well, you learn something new every day, including new acronyms.
Wow, okay. Really fast, forward proxy is a client-side proxy. So it's basically a client is connecting to a proxy. And then, so basically the proxy is upstream of you. So you're connecting to a proxy and then the proxy is doing some stuff. Reverse proxy is the client is connecting to the proxy and then the proxy is connecting to you. So the proxy is downstream of you. All of these words are flipped often within the industry, upstream, downstream, forward, reverse. So it's all kind of meaningless, you know, but that's, I think that would be the most common definition.
Great. And is there a way to modify part of your Envoy configurations, like appending a route to the existing routes using XDS? Who's going to be best for that one?
We don't have a pretty straightforward way to do this. We had the proposal before, but I don't think it's implemented anywhere to do the partial modification of existing resources. Matt, I think XDS Relay will do part of that. Ken?
Theoretically, I mean, yeah, this is one of the things that I think post MVP that XDS Relay could do. I think we could do config injection, but no, like at the XDS layer, there's no built-in way to do this. Obviously, keep in mind that, you know, XTS is a gRPC protobuf specified API that's convertible back and forth to JSON and YAML. So, I mean, you can always have intermediate layers, you know, that can intercept config and you can modify it. But there's no like built-in way to do it.
Great. I'm very cautious. We've got 15 minutes left and we have got some seriously amazing questions coming in. So let's try it. So when can we see support for Quick? Any roadmap?
I need to circle back with Google on this. Like they're working on it, but I'm not sure when the MVP is going to be done. It's very close to done. Like it actually mostly works right now in integration tests, but I think there's some TLS stuff that's not quite wired up. Do you know, Lizan, what the status is here?
No, I haven't followed up on the Quick side either.
I think they're close, and I see actually some PRs open now. So I'm hoping within a couple of months we would be at an MVP state where we can do server-side termination of H3.
Great. So we've had one question upvoted, so we're going to go for that one. Is the Envoy log thread safe? Because we just have a filter written in Go, not through WASM. We are using CGO, and we also support Go routine. So is it safe if we call Envoy log from a Go routine via CGO to C?
Yes, Envoy log is thread safe.
Yeah.
I mean, I will point out that logging is not super performant, so I wouldn't log too much, but yes, it is thread safe.
Great, and we've got another long question, so we've got a bit of a setup for this one. At my company, I am trying to deploy an Envoy proxy for GRC transcoding. I think that's probably what it intended to say. Yeah. Transcoding and authorization for a few microservices. Getting transcoding to work was fairly simple. I'm a bit stuck on the authorization part. We have an IAM service that handles all authorization here, but it is a custom gRPC API, which is non-Envoy compatible. Can I write a thing compatibility layer in that service so Envoy can use this as an external authorization service? So far, so good. Where I am stumped is how or where do I prepare the arguments that are required for our IAM service? There has to be a hook, filter, or layer where I can plug this logic in. I understand one possibility is to use, is that Lua script in the Envoy config and to put extra HTTP headers. This might be work, but it's probably kludgy. What a fantastic word. What are your thoughts on how to approach this and the best practices in this regard?
So for X authorization, I think we have the way to extract the custom HTTP headers through the gRPC XOSD, but it have to be punted in the config. One thing you can do is probably just like from Envoy to your thin layer, send as much as possible and process there. I know it will affect the performance, but that should be a way to do that I can think of. Matt?
Yeah, it's not 100% clear to me from the question, like where the headers need to be set and what they need to be set from. I mean, it sounds like something that could be done using a custom filter potentially. It sounds like something that could be potentially done using the config.
Within
within XAuth. Since this question references I'm not sure if we're talking about a particular cloud provider. One thing that I would look at is I think AWS has done some filters recently related to signing. So it's possible that code might help you if you're talking about AWS IAM. But I think some more details here would be useful.
All right, and this question is for you, Matt. So at Lyft, do you capture traffic from services so that it always goes through Envoy, or does the client service need to opt in by using the thing client? Wondering how you prevent services from dialing other services without going through Envoy.
So for service-to-service traffic, it is required, and we don't at Lyft actually force traffic through using IP tables. We do have a thing client just because it's a little easier to understand. In terms of how do we prevent services from dialing other services, it's because the services have no way of knowing how to reach the other services. Like all of service discovery is handled via Envoy. So the services just would have no way of actually contacting the other service. So that problem solves itself. The one area at Lyft where we still allow services to circumvent Envoy is external traffic. So we don't block external traffic. It's meaning we don't force external API traffic to go through Envoy. For security reasons and auditing reasons is something that we're planning on doing soon. So hopefully by the end of the year or early next year, basically the only way that you'll be able to reach the network is through Envoy.
That's great. And we've got one last question here and we've got 10 minutes to go. So this comes from Dennis. So speaking of ePOL, is there an interest in switching to IO_Uring instead of ePOL?
So the really ironic thing is that if we use IO_Uring is actually similar to Windows IO completion ports. So in my personal opinion, Windows NT IO completion ports is a much better way of doing IO. And that's something that's been in Windows NT for like 25 years or more. But that's just not the way Linux has historically worked, or on, BSD, it's had KQ. So IO_Uring is actually getting back to what Windows had like 25 or 30 years ago, which is great. So it's like, if we were using IO_Uring, it would make the Windows port probably much easier, but we're not. So I think to actually answer your question, we're certainly open to it, but I don't think there's anyone that's actively working on it.
And please excuse my very abysmal pronunciations of things. I think it's abundantly clear.
I actually don't know how people pronounce that, so I might have bungled it also. I'm not sure if people say U-ring or ring, or I have no idea.
Lizan, anything to? Are you going to throw a pronunciation onto the table?
No,
I don't know. Yeah.
No, I don't know. So.
All right, and a follow-up question to the Lyft one we asked a moment ago, Matt. So following up on blocking external traffic for services in Lyft, is that something that will be built into the custom Lyft control plane?
Yeah, so, and, to fully block traffic, I mean, that requires a very opinionated solution, meaning, we need to, build it into the way that we use Kubernetes, all of our firewall rules, all of those kinds of things. So yes, it's something that would be built throughout the stack in terms of the compute stack networking, in terms of the control plane. We would probably use, we actually haven't talked about it yet, we probably use the dynamic forward proxy, possibly with some RBAC rules to only allow, certain targets. But I think that needs to be thought through fully. Yeah.
Great, thank you. And as we've got sort of less than 10 minutes left.
I do still see one question left.
One question left. I'm not entirely sure how to phrase this one. So Lizan, if you are able to understand it.
I don't know. I think it's asking for session affinity and sticky session for web applications. Yeah, I'm not sure what the question is really about, but I think we got similar GitHub issue like before this. The affinity feature that we had wasn't enough for some web use cases. Matt, do you remember that?
This is one of those questions where it really depends on the use case.
Yeah.
So without more information, it's very hard to answer, just because how applications handle sticky sessions is really application specific. We do handle certain types of cookie session affinity. We have different types of consistent hashing, which is somewhat sticky. But unfortunately, it's really, so I guess the answer is yes, we do support it in quotes. Whether that support works for you is very application dependent.
Yeah.
And we've cycled through all the questions. So thank you everyone for a really engaging session, as we've got sort of like 6 minutes left before the end. Is there anything you can tell us about the next release, like what's coming up, what we've got to look forward to in terms of features?
I can go first, which is just to give a general answer, which is that this is a really common question, which is, what is Envoy's roadmap? And my favorite answer to this question is that, unlike many open source projects that are out there that are driven by companies or open core or et cetera, we don't really have a roadmap because we are community driven, right? I mean, it's like, I don't really know what's going to wind up in any particular release until someone shows up and actually offers the code for it. And I recognize that that's a very unsatisfying answer for most people, but that's just the reality of the situation that we're in.
Yeah.
But with that said, I will speak to speak to my own knowledge of what's going on, and I think I'm very interested in some of the security enhancements that we are going to be working on. I think just we continue to invest a ton in fuzzing. I think in the future in open source, we're going to be working on more adaptive resource usage. So basically making Envoy handle different types of DOS attacks better. Obviously there's Quick. I'm forgetting. It's like there's always so many people working on so many things that it's really hard for me to keep track. But those are the quick things that come to mind. How about
and
you,
WebAssembly?
Yeah, right, WebAssembly, of course. WebAssembly will hopefully land in Envoy upstream at some point.
Yeah, WebAssembly, we have more protocols landing. I think in this release, PostgreSQL is the big one.
Yep.
That we added the support. It can do the stats currently. We're trying to add in more to that.
Yep, there's also, there's people still working on Kafka, more Kafka protocol supports. There's always people adding things around gRPC and HTTP support. Alyssa has been doing a ton of work around Connect, so lots of really exciting work there. And yeah, I think there's always a ton going on, I think is the answer.
And an opportunity as well for everybody to join in and help and shape it.
Yep.
Yeah.
And like I was saying before, don't feel that you have to be a systems networking expert. We actually desperately need help in lots of other areas. And, if you enjoy Python scripting or tooling, we have stuff for you. If you like examples or Docker, we have stuff for you. If you like documentation and writing, we have stuff for you. So open source is, there's lots of people that are willing to write code. There's not as many people that are willing to do all of the other things, and those other things have really outsized impact.
Well, thank you both very much. And thank you to all of our attendees as well who have asked questions, who have participated, and to all of you for making this a really awesome session. So we'll go to one last question with 3 minutes to go. I'll throw it in at the last minute. What advice can you give to beginners who are getting involved? Where's the best place for them to start?
Sorry, in terms of getting involved with the project or you want to go first, Lizan? Give your opinion.
Sure. Getting involved in the project, as we answered before, starting with the beginner issues will be probably the best way to start with. And we have the guide or pinging on Slack. Yeah, that's something I would recommend to start from the beginner issue.
Yeah, my advice is both what I said before, which is that we need help in a variety of different areas.
Yeah.
But often the best thing that I tell people to do who are trying to get involved is read the documentation, and if there are things that confuse you when you read them, please fix it, right? I mean, that's a great way of getting involved because it helps you learn the project and it really helps improve the situation for the next person. Envoy is a incredibly complicated piece of software, and there's just no way around that. It's a Swiss Army knife solution that is used in a ton of different use cases. So it's not really designed to be an opinionated, out of the box software. And I think some people expect that, but that's just not what the project is. So I think, getting involved, it can be daunting for certain people. And I think the best that we can do is to try to have a very welcoming community, and which we do. And, to the extent that people want to get involved and help improve the documentation and the onboarding and fix beginner issues, we really love that.
Amazing. And as we've just hit 12:30 Pacific, thank you both again for a really engaging session and for taking the time out today to be able to answer a huge variety of questions, and for, helping us learn new acronyms and pronunciation. And Matt, I'm terribly sorry I'm not allowed any of your cats. I've just been told.
Okay.
Oracle, no. I do apologize.
Shame. I was really hoping to give away a couple of them. I guess not. I'll have to find someone else.
All right. Well, thank you all very much. We'll send out a recording, and we really appreciate you all taking the time to join us today as well, because as people asking questions, you make this a lot easier to be able to sit and answer them as well. So thank you all very much, and I hope you have a brilliant rest of your day.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Thank
Bye.
you so much.
Yep. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.